Be very, very clear. The city has not and will not have a contract for this. It is the responsibility of the owners to make this situation right, to mitigate it. And so we've been working with them to make sure that they do that. They had a plan, as we talked about earlier, to implode the building. There are folks that came through with that plan, and the area that was going to be affected was not really acceptable. It was going to affect too many of the other buildings around it. Remember, we're in the historic French Quarter here. So they chose not to go forward with that plan, they being the owners. They have presented a plan today that our engineers received, which is going to be a more what's called a conventional demolition of the building, whereby they come in with heavy equipment and pick it apart. That plan is complicated, as this has been throughout. I've said a very dangerous building. So how do you stabilize the building and not get anyone hurt? Although an implosion is much safer for life safety, worse for the buildings around it. Picking it apart is obviously much more risky for the individuals that have to go complete that task. So we have received the plan. Our engineers are looking at that plan. It will be vetted heavily. There is a very strict permitting process, a very intense vetting process, permitting process that we will go through and make sure that this plan is safe. Most importantly, I'll go through again what our goals and our objectives are here. Life safety is always number one. We need to make sure that we don't have any further loss of life or injury as we go about doing this. We will do that. Next is removal of the victims, so we can give these families some closure, and that has not happened as fast as we would like it, but obviously, as I said, safety being number one. And then we have property conservation, the example of the implosion, damaging structures around it. They make no mistake about it. We will stay on top of this to ensure the safety of our community, the individuals, and obviously the property conservation, the buildings around it.
Is the plan for this still mid-January or before that?
No, this plan, once again, we just saw it today. I want to be very clear about that. And have been looking at it, it was this morning at 9:30, and you see I'm leaving here at this time. But the engineers have been looking at it. This plan, if it's approved, if it gets permitted, is projected to start seeing some movement here as early as next week. But once again, that's about stabilizing the building, getting it where the building is safe to start this demolition process. And once again, obviously with that, as soon as we deem it to be safe, is to go after getting those remains to give the family some closure.
How long would a demolition process take? Obviously an implosion would be seconds. Demolition would take how long?
Well, I don't want to get into too much on the weeds and that, but if you think about it, although an implosion seems like seconds, it takes a very long time to get that set up in the building. You heard about it when they were talking, when the ownership was talking about doing that, it was going to be 9 weeks before they could implode it. So it's not just seconds, it's a while, and I'm not mean to impugn what you were saying, but it takes a minute to get them in. Then you have a pile of rubble that you have to go through and get the recovery done and then haul it away. So even that plan was going to be a period of 4 or 5 months. This plan, as we saw it today, is still a plan that looks like it's going to be well over 6, 7 months. I want to clarify this too. That timeline that's put there is not put with dates in it. It's put there as if we go uninterrupted. Before we can even start doing anything, there is an evidentiary plan that needs to be signed off by all interested parties. We're talking about everyone involved here. Not just the city, but obviously there are a lot of other folks who have vested interest in this. All their attorneys, everyone. That plan is being vetted. Nothing happens until that is signed off on by the courts. So that's another thing. So when you talk about a timeline, we would like to think it could go as fast as possible, but there will be things that may, obviously safety issues, and then the evidentiary plan. That is being, once again, I just want to clarify that evidentiary plan is being circulated now amongst the parties and vetted, so hopefully it'll get signed off on.
And how much longer does, searching for evidence for an investigation, whether it's criminal or whatnot, how much does that add to the time, and what kind of task does that add to the...
So that evidentiary plan that I talked about, that's part of what you're asking about, the evidence recovery. That plan gets signed off on. It talks about exactly what items need to be taken out the building. So obviously that takes longer than if you were just picking up stuff, putting it in a truck. So we have a victim recovery, number one, once we start to do this, right? Doing it safely, the victim recovery, but then getting the evidence and getting it into a storage. And all that's part of that plan. It's getting signed off by everyone. So just like police take evidence from any other incident, you have OSHA investigation going on here. Obviously, all the interested parties want to make sure that no evidence that's pertinent isn't retained, and so that's what that evidentiary plan is. It's a very complex thing in and of itself, and once again, the parties are signing off. Once they're in agreement, it'll go to a court.
Chief McConnell, I understand this is an unprecedented situation, that we haven't really quite ever seen something quite like this, of this magnitude at least, but I think a lot of people are still wondering, why was an implosion plan announced if it wasn't necessarily feasible by the building owners?
The building owners, I don't think, are implosion experts. So they looked at several different plans. If you remember, go back a ways and look at the interviews we talked about. They told us they had 4 different contractors they were looking at with various plans. They chose the implosion plan. When that contractor came back, started running their engineering, their reports showed that the impact to the surrounding area was going to be much greater than was acceptable.
A few weeks ago at one of the press conferences, you guys said it's going to be difficult to go in there and get the bodies because you have to pick off pieces of the building. So how do you go about picking away pieces of the building now without further collapse?
That's exactly what we're talking about, stabilizing that building to get that done. So you have parts hanging off the building. I mean, everybody can see what the building looks like. You have components of the building that are hanging over where rescue workers, my folks, right, will have to go in and do this recovery. That has to all be mitigated. So it is literally just as you stated, picking parts off that are hanging over where the rescue would have to take place. And it is a longer timeline, but it'll probably, I would think you would see things starting sooner, hopefully. But it does take a while, and you got to make it, once again, safe where you don't put life or at risk. You don't put rescuers' lives at risk.
How does the payment work? Obviously, there's some overtime that goes into this that comes out of the taxpayers' pockets, but eventually, will it get paid back by the owners of this building? How will that work?
I would hope so, that any money that the city has expended, the city will be made whole on this. Obviously, public safety is number one for us, so we'll do what it takes to keep the community safe. But the owners I will clarify once again, the owners are responsible for this in every aspect of it. And we will hold them accountable at every turn.
And the plan is still an entire demolition?
Yes, at this point, I believe the plan is going to be complete demolition of the building.
And I know the city has some engineers it's hired, and there's also the developers got its engineers. Which group can you say decided, no, we're not going to go forward with the implosion? And was it the city's engineers reviewing this, or was it 1031 Canals?
It was the owners. It is the owners' responsibility. We have been looking at the plans that they have, but the owners are ultimately responsible and chose to go the other route because of the impact to the surrounding buildings, which obviously, if they're damaged, once again, they're responsible for.
Thank you all very much.